In the last days of August 1944, shortly after sunrise over northern France, German officers at Observation Post 4 near Pardal sat in stunned silence. The morning combat report from Flak Regiment 155W, responsible for monitoring the V-1 flying bomb offensive, lay crumpled on the desk. The numbers it contained were mathematically impossible. According to the observers along the coast, British anti-aircraft guns had destroyed 82% of the V-1 missiles launched that day. Such a figure contradicted every principle of ballistics and anti-aircraft probability that Luftwaffe technical officers had been taught. What they had watched through their field glasses made even less sense. V-1s flying steadily toward England, suddenly enveloped by explosions that were not direct hits. Instead, the shells seemed to burst near the targets with uncanny timing, shredding the flying bombs with fragments before the warheads could reach British soil. At the headquarters of the regiment, located in the Château d'Etou, the commander of the V-1 campaign, Oberst Max Wachtel, read the reports with growing anxiety. Since the first V-1s had been launched in mid-June, British interception rates had increased week after week. What began as a modest 17% in early June had risen to 74% by late August. But the previous day's figure, 82%, was so extraordinary that Wachtel suspected sabotage or mechanical failure. Emergency inspections dismissed both possibilities. Every V-1 examined behaved normally when test-fired over German territory. The missiles failed only when they approached the British coastal defenses. That inconsistency forced German scientists into a conclusion they had never expected. The British were using a form of anti-aircraft technology that Germany neither possessed nor understood. What Wachtel could not know was that he and his staff were witnessing one of the most closely guarded Allied secrets of World War II, the proximity fuse, or VT fuse, a device so revolutionary that the U.S. protected it with a secrecy level comparable only to the Manhattan Project. The proximity fuse was turning near misses into certain kills, detonating anti-aircraft shells automatically when they came close to a target. To German observers and to German physics, these kills should have been impossible.
The story began 10 weeks earlier, on June 13, 1944, exactly 1 week after the D-Day landings. At 4:25 a.m., the first V-1 flying bomb crashed into London, landing on Grove Road in Bow. It destroyed homes, a railway bridge, and killed 6 civilians. The V-1 was the world's first operational cruise missile, powered by an Argus pulse jet, traveling at roughly 640 kilometers per hour, and capable of carrying an 850-kilogram warhead. German leaders believed it would terrorize Britain into submission. Major Walter Dornberger of the V-weapon program calculated that even if only 1 in 4 missiles reached London, the explosive volume would exceed what the Luftwaffe delivered during the Blitz. German confidence was not unfounded. Based on speed, altitude, and size, the V-1 should have been nearly impossible to intercept. Fighters had to approach dangerously close to score hits, and anti-aircraft gunners had only seconds to calculate trajectories. German engineers had estimated that the chance of an AA gun achieving a direct hit with timed fuses was less than 1 in 10,000 shells. All their calculations assumed that shells had to hit the target precisely. They had no concept that the British were using shells that detonated automatically when they sensed a target nearby. The Germans had heard vague rumors before the war. The Oslo Report of 1939 had mentioned Allied interest in radio-based fuses, but German scientists had studied the idea and declared it unworkable. In their experience, vacuum tubes were far too fragile to survive the immense forces generated when fired from a gun. up to 20,000 Gs of acceleration and tens of thousands of rotations per minute. Batteries small enough to fit in the nose of a 5-inch shell seemed like fantasy. Germany researched more than 30 concepts for similar devices, yet none came close to practical use. What Germany dismissed as impossible, the United States had quietly solved. Beginning in early 1943, the U.S. Navy used proximity fuses in combat, most famously when the cruiser USS Helena shot down a Japanese dive bomber using shells that exploded as soon as they approached the aircraft. By mid-1944, the Americans were producing 40,000 proximity fuses each day. Over 110 factories were involved, with Crosley Corporation making 1/4 of the entire output. Sylvania Electric developed miniature tubes capable of withstanding enormous stress. Nearly 400,000 such tubes rolled off production lines each day. By war's end, the United States would spend over $1 billion producing 22 million proximity fuses. When the V-1 campaign began in mid-June 1944, the British rapidly reorganized their anti-aircraft network. They moved guns southward to form a dense coastal belt so any unexploded shells would fall into the sea, denying the Germans a chance to recover samples. American SCR-584 radar automatically tracked incoming V-1s and fed firing solutions to the guns. VT-fused shells created a three-dimensional zone of destruction. They no longer needed a precise hit. If a shell passed within a few meters of a V-1, it exploded, sending fragments slicing into the thin metal skin of the flying bomb. This combination of radar, organization, and the proximity fuse produced the staggering interception rates that baffled German observers. By July, the Germans knew something was wrong, but they could not determine what. They watched V-1s fly perfectly, only to disintegrate when surrounded by explosions too far away to be direct hits. Ammunition estimates indicated that British gunners were achieving kills with shockingly few rounds, another statistical impossibility. Every German attempt to counter the trend failed. Changing launch altitudes, varying approaches, firing larger salvos, and shifting launch times all achieved nothing. The British gun belt became a technological wall. By early September 1944, the V-1 campaign against England was effectively defeated. Of the 9,521 V-1s launched from ground sites toward Britain, only 2,515 reached London. The casualties, 6,184 killed and nearly 18,000 injured, were tragic, but far lower than German planners had envisioned. British commanders estimated that without proximity fuses, the civilian death toll might have been 4 or 5 times higher.
Despite the V-1's failure, German intelligence remained completely in the dark. Not a single proximity fuse was captured during the coastal campaign. Naval patrols guarded the channel to prevent dud recovery. Anti-aircraft crews who used VT ammunition knew only that the shells were special and tightly controlled. Even Allied ground forces were forbidden from using proximity fuses until late 1944, because a captured shell could compromise the